Welcome to Unwelcome Inheritance, Break Your Family's Cycle of Addictive Behavior. And this is a book that I wrote, and I wove together some of my mother's unpublished words. And this is written sort of as a conversational style between my mother and I, so that in this way I could bring out to you some insights that you may not have heard yet. Also, I'm going to tell you a bit of my story for a couple of reasons. One, because I want to share with you how, despite my family's really tragic experience, so much of it is being used to help other people. And also because my hope and my belief is that you will see yourself in my story as I relate to you around what I experienced, how I felt about it, how the world looked through my eyes, and what all was going on in my house. So here we go. Let's start with a quote from my mom, Dr. Jane. Inherent in this model of looking at the family is also a model for looking at children of alcoholics. Because for every generation that has passed along alcoholism, there must be children affected as well who live out those issues if not treated. And since so many of these children become alcoholic themselves, in part because of their physical vulnerabilities and the behavior they learn from their parents, we need to break this cycle. So let's get into my story a little bit, and then the learning will begin. I remember when I was 4 years old, eavesdropping on my parents fighting downstairs when I was supposed to be sleeping. As I crouched in a ball outside my bedroom door, I could hear my drunken father's booming voice vibrate through the walls below. God damn it, he bellowed. His bellowing was followed by my mother's pleading voice, glass smashing, and her sobbing. I wish I could say this was an unusual occurrence, but it was not. It was a scene that played out over and over again, all through my childhood. Some nights I'd hear the police come to the door. On a few occasions, I'd wake up in the morning and Mom wouldn't be there because she had been whisked away to the hospital during the night. Dad would mumble something about a car accident, which made no sense, because if that had happened, shouldn't we be with her? During their fights, I'd sit frozen, yet unable to tear myself away. If I heard my father's loud footsteps nearing the stairs, I'd jump into my bed and feign sleep. Then the bedroom door would slam across the hall, and the house would become still. My mother would remain downstairs to sleep on the pull-out sofa that she bought with the money she made seeing clients. On these occasions, the butterflies in my stomach fluttered madly, keeping me awake until the wee hours when I couldn't fight sleep any longer. My childhood memories are filed away in my mind according to my grade in school, and each one of those years is represented by a story that springs to mind when that file is opened. Looking back now, as a woman with children of my own, with all these years in between, it is clear that all of those stories have a common thread. A powerless, desperate young child being raised in a family and in a home that was ravaged by alcoholism. I step into the feelings of the young child I am describing and realize that it is still me, that the lens through which I view the world is still distorted by my experiences. On school day mornings, my mother brought me through the giant red door of the little red schoolhouse on Park Street and left me there to have a few hours of carefree fun with some other children. Mrs. Gannon was my rather scary, stern-faced nursery school teacher. Did she know that at 4 years old, I was not a spontaneous and naive little girl anymore? Mom would leave me to fend for myself. I'd hang up my coat in the assigned cubby with the anticipation of a businessman entering his Wall Street office at dawn and disposing of his overcoat before beginning a dramatic day that would end in either dismal failure or huge success. I was a little girl whose mission it was to win the approval of this intimidating teacher, and my efforts seemed to backfire every time. My little classmates were awed that I was a fluent reader, and in my desperation to be liked, I read Curious George to anyone who asked. Mrs. Gannon would usually snap the book from my hands without saying a word, but with a look that clearly told me, "Stop that, you show-off." I remember one time we were at our cubbies getting dressed to play outside in the snow, and I tried to help Billy get his boots on because he looked like he was going to cry. Mrs. Gannon gritted her teeth and told me, "Stop helping him. He has to do it himself." I felt so ashamed and insecure, wondering, yet again, why she didn't like me. Even at that young age, I recall those feelings as being very familiar. I'd often felt them at home. Imagine 4 years old and already codependent. The following year, I began elementary school. After yet another sleepless night, I'd walk to my new sanctuary, Northeast Elementary School. School was a relief from the stress and fear of being home. By first grade, however, my sense of self-worth was already shot, especially in terms of how I expected to be treated by boys. We sat in groups of 3 in our classroom, and my first crush, David, sat between Suzanne and me. Even though we were inches away from one another, David didn't even know I was alive. He and our classmate Stephen both had a mad crush on Julie, and they would vie for her attention by bringing her gifts, trying to outdo one another. I still feel pathetic admitting this, but in my desperation to get David to notice me, I'd bring him gifts to give to Julie. A shrink might hear me describe my school experiences in nursery school and first grade and conclude that this was the same desperation I felt when vying for my father's attention. I know now that this behavior was a sign of things to come. In second grade, I had the prettiest teacher in the whole school, Mrs. Evans, and I was her star student. The work was easy, and I was so far ahead of the class that Mrs. Evans had me help her correct my classmates' workbooks while the other kids finished the work I'd completed long before. At conferences, teachers told my mother how they wished they could have 30 of me in their class, how proud she was to repeat that comment to friends and relatives, and for that brief moment, I felt special. But usually I just felt awkward and ashamed and lonely. The other girls all seemed like such great friends with one another. They all giggled together about their gymnastics class and Hebrew school. I wondered how it was that they got to do these things. I would have adored gymnastics and going to Hebrew school with other Jewish kids. They were so lucky. I had only one friend at school, Susie, who would achieve the popularity that I and most kids aspire to. To my surprise, she invited me over to her house a few times. It never occurred to me that one day I would have to reciprocate, and when that day came, it was not pretty. When we got to the house, Dad was uncharacteristically home instead of at work and was passed out on the living room floor when we arrived. My mother nonchalantly explained to Susie, "Oh, he sleeps on the floor because he has a problem with his back. The doctor told him that sleeping on the floor would help." When I went to a recovery group for teenage children of alcoholics a couple of years later, I learned that my mother's lies were typical behavior in an alcoholic home. Long story short, I never had to worry about what would happen next time Susie came over because she never came back. Our friendship was over. We lived on a pretty tree-lined street in the suburbs of Manhattan, a commuter's paradise. My father was an award-winning broadcast journalist and producer at a major television network. He may have been a high-level executive, but in my view, he was still a low-bottom alcoholic, even though he put on that fancy suit and shiny shoes every day and commuted into Manhattan. Our neighborhood was teeming with kids, and we often played kickball in the street. My troubles were forgotten during these playtimes until Dad came staggering down the street from the New York City bus stop around the corner, sometimes drunk and bloodied from a fall or two he'd taken somewhere on the way home. Dozens of kids scattered when they saw him coming, just like cockroaches do when the lights go on. I wished then that I could just disappear. Some afternoons or on a weekend, I'd walk a full mile to Kyle's drugstore to steal candy. After such petty thefts, I'd go home, hide in my closet, and enjoy the relief I felt as I gorged myself into a sugar stupor. Even as a little girl, I was like a true addict, taking risks to get a hold of something that might numb my feelings. Like so many children of alcoholics, sugar became my drug of choice at an early age. Sometimes I'd rifle through mom's coat pockets for change and walk around the corner for ice cream. I'd be gone for at least an hour, but no one seemed to miss me. One day, the pharmacist at Kyle's saw me shove a pound of Swedish fish candy down my pants and walk out of the store. He called mom, and when I got home, she cried and cried. She was so tired all of the time because of the late night brawls, and crying made the dark circles under her eyes look even darker and puffier. I don't know whether she was upset because her 17-year-old daughter was caught shoplifting or because she never even noticed that I was gone. Was she in denial about her child acting out this way to get the attention she craved? Anyway, I wasn't punished, and the incident was never mentioned again. Eventually, it would be dinner time, and if Dad weren't already out drinking, we'd usually sit down to eat as a family. One false move, and the meal would end with him blowing his top and slamming the front door on his way out to the bar. I'd be in my pajamas and in bed by the time he returned, and the story would begin again, with me eavesdropping while my parents fought when I was supposed to be in bed sleeping. And I'm going to stop there for today. Please join me for the next video where we will continue with Chapter 1, A Childhood from Hell. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you in the next video.